Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into one of modern history's most impactful and, frankly, controversial figures, Osama bin Laden.
That's right. We've got a stack of your sources here, and we're going to try and sift through them.
Our goal really is to pull out those, surprising facts and key insights you might not have known.
We've taken a pretty comprehensive look at his journey, from his, very privileged early life right through to his strategic mindset and the monumental global impact of his actions.
Yeah.
Our deep dive today is all about understanding the many complex layers of this figure, drawing directly and only from the material you've provided us.
Okay, so we'll explore who he truly was, what propelled his radical actions, and the lasting, often contradictory legacy he left behind. We're going to stick to the factual information in our source material, so, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
To begin, what often surprises people is Osama bin Laden's background. He wasn't born into poverty or obscurity, was he?
Not at all. No.
It's a striking starting point when considering his later path.
Absolutely not. Mohammed bin Wad bin Laden was born March 10th, 1957 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And he was born into one of the wealthiest families in the kingdom, really aristocratic.
The bin Laden family, yeah.
Exactly. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, was a billionaire construction magnate, extremely close ties to the Saudi royal family.
Right.
So Osama inherited a significant fortune himself. The estimate is somewhere between $25 and $30 million.
Wow. So an upbringing that offered every advantage.
Yeah.
How did his education and early interests align with, or maybe diverge from, that elite environment?
Well, he attended the elite Al-Thager Model School. He even took an English language course in Oxford, England, back in '71.
Oxford.
Yeah. And he pursued higher education at King Abdulaziz University, study economics and business administration. Although, interestingly, while some reports suggest he earned a degree, maybe civil engineering or public admin, others indicate he actually left before completing one.
So a bit unclear on the degree itself.
A little bit. But what is clear is that during these university years, his primary focus really became religion.
And it sounds like this wasn't just a casual interest. He really immersed himself.
Precisely, yeah. He became deeply involved in interpreting the Quran and the whole concept of jihad.
Okay.
Often alongside charitable work, it seems. He was a pupil of the influential Islamist scholar Abdullah Yusuf Azam.
Right, we hear that name a lot in connection with that.
We do. And he was also profoundly influenced by the Islamic revolutionary ideas of Sayyid Qutb.
Ah, Qutb, okay.
Yeah, this intellectual grounding in radical Islamic thought was really foundational for him.
What's truly fascinating, though, considering his later persona, are some of his personal interests outside of religious study. The sources paint a more sort of nuanced picture, don't they?
They certainly do. It's quite unexpected. The sources mention he enjoyed writing poetry.
Poetry.
Yeah. And reading works by military strategists like Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, political figures like Charles de Gaulle. He apparently had a fondness for black stallions and was even an avid association football player.
Like soccer?
Yeah, soccer. Specifically a center forward, and reportedly followed the English club Arsenal.
Arsenal. Okay, that is unexpected. It adds a layer of detail, doesn't it?
It really does. A humanizing layer almost before everything else.
And what about his personal life? We often hear about his public, militant persona, but what was his family life like, according to the sources?
Well, he married his first wife, Najwa Ghanem, back in 1974. He was only 17.
Very young.
Very young. And he went on to have somewhere between 20 and 26 children with his various wives.
20 to 26 children.
Wow. His personal bodyguard described him as a frugal man, surprisingly, and a strict father, but also someone who enjoyed taking his large family on shooting trips and picnics out in the desert.
Interesting contrast.
It is. And it's also worth noting, the sources mentioned his father died in a plane crash in '67, and his eldest half-brother also died in a plane crash in '88.
Huh. Adds another layer.
Definitely. Physically, he was described as tall and thin, maybe 6'4" to 6'6", though some friends said just over 6 feet. Olive complexion, left-handed, usually walked with a cane.
And mild-mannered.
Often described that way, yes. Soft-spoken, mild-mannered. It's a stark contrast to the public image he cultivated later on.
Okay, so given this wealthy, educated, almost you could say cultured background, it's clear his path took a really sharp turn toward militancy. How does the Afghan-Soviet War become such a crucial turning point?
Right. Well, after leaving college in 1979, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan happened. That seemed to be the catalyst.
The big one.
Yeah. He traveled to Pakistan, joined Abdullah Yusuf Azam to support the Mujahideen, the Islamic resistance fighters against the Soviets. And he channeled his family's construction company's money and machinery directly into that effort. The sources say he reportedly felt outraged that an injustice had been committed against the people of Afghanistan.
Right. And a crucial point here, especially given later narratives, is the role of the U.S. in supporting the broader Mujahideen movement. Did bin Laden himself directly receive U.S. aid during this time?
That's a key question, and the sources are quite clear on this. Osama bin Laden did not receive any direct funding or training from the U.S. during the 1980s.
Okay, so that common idea is not supported by these sources.
Not directly, no. Now, the wider Afghan Mujahideen, they received significant aid from the U.S. from Saudi Arabia, China, mostly channeled through Pakistan's ISI, their intelligence service.
Right.
But the sources say only some of that aid bled to the Arabs fighting the Soviets. Bin Laden did work with the ISI. He met its head, Hamid Gul.
Okay.
But interestingly, his first trainer, according to one source, was actually a U.S. Special Forces commando, Ali Mohammed.
Ali Mohammed. That's a significant detail in itself.
It is a complex picture.
So he wasn't a direct American asset, but rather an independent actor in a really complex geopolitical landscape. What came next for him after his involvement in the Afghan-Soviet War?
Well, by 1984, bin Laden and Azam co-founded Maktab al-Khidmat. That translates roughly to services office.
Okay.
This organization was really instrumental in funneling money, arms, and, crucially, foreign fighters into Afghanistan.
Right. Foreign fighters.
Yeah. And bin Laden, leveraging his inherited fortune, provided critical logistical support. He also established training camps in Pakistan and even participated in some combat himself.
He thought personally.
Yes, notably the Battle of Jaji in 1987. Which was apparently heavily lionized in the Arab press, and that really raised his profile significantly.
Okay. And this direct involvement ultimately led to the formation of al-Qaeda. How did that transition happen from Maktab al-Khidmat to this new global organization?
Well, by 1988, bin Laden had a strategic split from Maktab al-Khidmat. There was a disagreement. Azam wanted Arab fighters integrated with the Afghans, but bin Laden envisioned a more distinct military-focused role for his specific group.
Okay. A different vision.
Exactly. And notes from a meeting on August 20th, 1988, they actually reveal al-Qaeda was established as a formal, though secret, organization. Described as an organized Islamic faction, its goal is to lift the word of God.
A formal group by 88.
Yes. And research suggests it effectively combined bin Laden's money with the operational expertise of Egyptian Islamic Jihad.
Right. Zawahiri's group.
Precisely. With the explicit aim of carrying out jihad globally, even after the Soviets eventually withdrew from Afghanistan.
That's a critical shift from supporting local resistance to planning global operations. So what did this mean for his return to Saudi Arabia? One would imagine he was seen as a hero initially.
He was in many circles. He was widely credited, by some anyway, with contributing to the Soviet Union's eventual downfall.
Yeah.
However, his anti-establishment leanings quickly started to emerge back home. He began engaging in opposition movements against the Saudi monarchy itself.
Really? How so?
Well, he offered al-Qaeda's services to overthrow the Soviet-aligned government in neighboring Yemen, the Yemeni Socialist Party, reportedly tried to assassinate YSP leaders, even funded a failed Afghan coup attempt in 1990, and was lobbying Pakistan's parliament. His focus was rapidly expanding beyond just Afghanistan.
He was becoming a regional player almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And then came the Gulf War.
Right. That seems like another huge turning point.
It was critical, especially for his relationship with the Saudi kingdom. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, directly threatening Saudi Arabia, bin Laden offered to defend the kingdom himself. He proposed deploying his Arab Legion, the fighters he'd commanded in Afghanistan.
But his offer was famously rejected, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In favor of American military assistance. That must have been a profound insult to him.
It was, by all accounts, a huge blow. The Saudi monarchy instead invited U.S. forces onto Saudi soil, the land of the two holy mosques.
Yeah.
Bin Laden publicly denounced this, called it an indignity, saw it as totally unacceptable reliance on American unbelievers to defend the Holy Land.
He was very vocal about it.
Extremely. He even tried to convince Saudi ulama, the religious scholars, to issue a fatwa, a religious edict, condemning the U.S. deployment. But they refused.
Oh.
This public, persistent criticism led directly to his house arrest and eventually his expulsion from Saudi Arabia in 1991.
So with Saudi Arabia no longer an option, where did he turn next to continue his radical mission?
He and his followers relocated to Sudan. By 1992, they were establishing a new base there for Mujahideen operations.
Sudan, okay.
Yeah. He invested heavily in the country, infrastructure, agriculture, various businesses. Famously, he even used the same bulldozers he'd employed in Afghanistan to build roads in Sudan.
Bring his resources with him.
He did.
Yeah.
And he was described as being generous to the poor there. Quite popular, actually. However, his financial situation took a big hit in 1994. That's when Saudi Arabia stripped him of his citizenship, and his family finally cut off his estimated $7 million annual stipend.
Right, that must have hurt.
Financially, yes, though he likely had other sources by then.
And it was during this period in Sudan that he started to be more directly linked to acts of terror, wasn't it?
Yes, the links become clearer. The first bombing believed to involve him was the December 1992 attack on the Gold Mohur Hotel in Aden, Yemen.
Okay.
And crucially during this time, al-Qaeda also reportedly developed a chilling justification for killing innocent people. It came via a fatwa from Mahmoud Salim.
A fatwa for killing civilians.
Essentially, yes. It stated that if killing an enemy is impossible without harming bystanders, those bystanders would find a proper reward in death. It's a terrifying piece of logic.
Yeah, absolutely terrifying.
And Sudan itself faced accusations from the U.S. State Department of sponsoring terrorism during this period.
Right.
Now, Sudan later claimed they offered to hand bin Laden over to the U.S., but the 9/11 Commission found no credible evidence for this. They said the U.S. only sought his expulsion from Sudan.
Okay, so pressure built on Sudan.
It did, which brings us to his eventual return to Afghanistan.
What precipitated that move?
Basically, increasing international pressure on Sudan. He departed Sudan for Afghanistan in May 1996.
Back to familiar territory.
Exactly. And there, he forged a very close relationship with Mullah Omar, the leader of the Taliban who were then taking power.
Right, Mullah Omar.
But it's noted his organization was significantly weakened by the expulsion from Sudan. Reports suggest losses of anywhere between $20 million and maybe even $300 million.
Oh, huge losses.
Significant disruption, definitely.
So it was from Afghanistan, then, that he issued his infamous declarations of war. Let's talk about the first one, the 1996 fatwa. What were the core points of that initial declaration of war?
Right, that was in August 1996. Titled Declaration of War Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Places.
Pretty direct title.
Very. His key grievances were, number one, the continued presence of U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War.
No.
Despite earlier assurances, he claimed that they would leave.
Okay.
Also, America's support for Israel and the sanctions on Iraq, which he blamed for civilian deaths. And he explicitly declared that, quote, terrorizing you while you are carrying arms on our land is a legitimate and morally demanded duty.
Chilling words.
Very. He also stated that while his youth would fight, the U.S. would struggle to convince its own troops. He held the U.S. accountable for Iraqi children's deaths due to sanctions, for actions of Zionist brothers in Lebanon, effectively nullifying any treaty, in his eyes, with Saudi Arabia.
A complete break. And then the 1998 fatwa seemed to significantly broaden his target and really raise the stakes. How was that one even more explicit?
It was, definitely. That was February 23, 1998. Bin Laden, alongside Ayman al-Zawahiri and others, issued the Declaration of the World Islamic Front for Jihad against the Jews and the Crusaders.
Jews and Crusaders.
Yeah, the language escalated. This declaration listed U.S. aggressions, again, forces in the Arabian Peninsula support for Israel.
Okay.
But then it declared jihad an individual duty for every Muslim to attack the U.S. and its allies anywhere in the world, civilians included.
A global call to arms.
Absolutely. He publicly stated North Americans were very easy targets and ominously promised results in a very short time. This was a clear, unambiguous call for globalized violence against Americans and their allies.
After these bold declarations, how did al-Qaeda's operations expand globally, particularly from its base back in Afghanistan?
Well, from Afghanistan, bin Laden really intensified his fundraising efforts. He got money from various donors and, notably, according to the sources, continued support from elements within Pakistan's ISI.
ISI again. Okay.
Yeah. This funding helped establish more training camps, and he essentially commandeered Ariana Afghan Airlines.
The national airline.
Yeah, transforming it into a conduit for ferrying militants, arms, cash, even opium, and providing false IDs for operatives.
That's incredible using a commercial airline.
And the sources mention the infamous arms smuggler Victor Bout was reportedly involved in these illicit activities too.
Victor Bout. Okay, the network was wide.
It seems so.
And the attacks really began to escalate after this, didn't they? What were some of the key events that brought bin Laden and al-Qaeda to greater international attention in the late 1990s?
They certainly did escalate. It has been claimed, for instance, that bin Laden funded the Luxor massacre in Egypt in November 1997.
Luxor.
He also deepened his alliance with the Taliban by sending his Afghan Arab fighters to help them kill thousands of Hazaras in Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan.
Brutal.
Yeah. But the most prominent attacks, the ones that really put bin Laden and al-Zawahiri onto the global stage, were the near-simultaneous U.S. embassy bombings.
Right. Africa, 1998.
Exactly. Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya, on August 7, 1998. Devastating attacks, killed hundreds, wounded thousands.
Huge impact. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, how did the U.S. respond to these significant bombings?
Well, in retaliation, President Bill Clinton ordered cruise missile strikes. August 20th, 1998. Targeted bin Laden-related sites in Sudan and Afghanistan.
And the missile strikes, right?
Yeah. And around this time, the CIA also reported to Clinton that al-Qaeda was actively preparing for attacks within the U.S.
Inside the U.S.?
Yes, including training personnel specifically to hijack aircraft. That was intelligence they had back in the late 90s.
Wow. That's chilling in hindsight.
Yeah.
So this is when he landed on the FBI's most wanted list and became a truly global target.
That's right. June 7, 1999, the FBI officially placed bin Laden on its 10 most wanted list for his alleged role in those 98 embassy attacks.
Okay.
Just a few months later, October 99, the UN designated al-Qaeda as a terrorist organization, a global consensus forming. But despite U.S. efforts, Clinton authorized the CIA to apprehend or kill him. There was even a failed rocket-propelled grenade attack in 2000, apparently.
They tried to get him.
They tried, but bin Laden remained at large. The Taliban, who were harboring him, consistently refused extradition. They cited insufficient evidence and argued non-Muslim courts couldn't try Muslims.
They protected him.
They absolutely did.
It's also interesting to see his connections to other, perhaps less obvious conflicts mentioned in the sources, like the Yugoslav wars. How was he involved there?
Yeah, that's another thread. A former U.S. State Department official described Bosnia and Herzegovina during that period as a kind of safe haven for terrorists, alleging that militant elements there were protecting extremists tied to bin Laden.
In Bosnia?
Yeah. He reportedly financed recruits from the Arab world to go fight in the region. And individuals linked to his network, some even apparently holding Bosnian citizenship, were implicated in various plots later on, like the Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia.
Huh.
There were even allegations that bin Laden himself and his assistant were granted Bosnian passports in 1993.
Passports, seriously.
That was the allegation. The Bosnian government initially denied it, but later sort of partially conceded some irregularities might have occurred. And Albania also reported bin Laden running a terror network there related to the Kosovo War. And former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic controversially claimed al-Qaeda actually aided the Kosovo Liberation Army, the KLA.
Wow, so his tentacles were really reaching into various conflicts.
It shows the sprawling, opportunistic nature of his network and influence.
Okay. This brings us, inevitably, to the event that truly catapulted Osama bin Laden into global infamy, the September 11 attacks. What were the key details from our sources regarding that day?
Right. Well, first, context. August 6, 2001, just weeks before, President George W. Bush received that famous intelligence report titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S.
The August 6 PDB. Yeah,
exactly. Then on September 11, 2001, al-Qaeda executed its devastatingly coordinated attack, used 4 commercial airplanes as missiles, 2 struck the World Trade Center Twin Towers in New York City, 1 hit the Pentagon just outside D.C.,
right.
And the 4th plane, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed in a field in Pennsylvania after passengers valiantly resisted the hijackers.
The passengers fought back.
They did. The human cost was immense. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives.
Just staggering. This raises an important question. What were bin Laden's stated motivations for these horrific events? Understanding his perspective, however distorted, is key.
It is. His identified motivations, as stated consistently in the sources, revolved around U.S. support for Israel, the continued presence of U.S. military forces in Saudi Arabia.
The Holy Land issue again?
Yes, and U.S. sanctions against Iraq, which he blamed for widespread suffering. In a 2004 video, bin Laden even claimed he was personally inspired to destroy the World Trade Center after witnessing the destruction of towers in Lebanon by Israel back in 1982.
He claimed that specific inspiration.
He did, and stated he personally directed the 19 hijackers.
He took direct credit.
Explicitly. He justified targeting American civilians as retaliation retaliation for U.S. troops, as he saw it, indiscriminately attacking Muslims. He argued all Americans were complicit because they elected their government and paid taxes.
A collective responsibility argument.
Exactly. Though he maintained the main targets were symbols of U.S. economic and military power, not women and children specifically, citing Prophet Muhammad as being against the killing of women and children.
A distinction he made. Okay, so what was his overall strategy then, given these bold declarations and the sheer scale of the 9/11 attacks? What did he hope to achieve?
The overarching strategy, as described, was essentially to lure larger, powerful enemies, primarily the U.S., into a prolonged war of attrition in Muslim countries.
A quagmire strategy.
Precisely. He believed this would attract jihadists from all over, fighters who would never surrender. And ultimately, this would lead to the economic collapse of enemy nations by, quote, bleeding them dry.
Bleeding them dry.
He explicitly spoke of bleeding America to the point of bankruptcy. It was a strategy aimed at exhaustion, financial ruin, not just, a single military victory.
A long game. Okay, after 9/11, the global manhunt for bin Laden became one of the most intense in history. How did that unfold over the next decade?
Well, the U.S. immediately launched the War on Terror. The CIA's Special Activities Division, their paramilitary arm, led the hunt for bin Laden specifically.
Right.
A significant $25 million reward was offered for information leading to his capture or death.
Mm-hmm. Big money.
Huge. Bin Laden initially denied involvement in 9/11, interestingly.
Oh, he denied it at first.
Yes, initially. But later, he explicitly claimed responsibility, as we mentioned.
Okay.
He was widely believed to be hiding in Afghanistan's White Mountains near the Pakistani border. And U.S. intelligence concluded he was actually present during the Battle of Tora Bora in late 2001.
Tora Bora, that was the big chance, wasn't it?
It seemed like it. Many analyses suggest he escaped largely due to the U.S. failure to commit enough of its own ground troops, relying too heavily on Afghan allies whose loyalties were questionable.
A missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And where did the trail go after Tora Bora? The search seemed to go cold for a long time.
It really did. It was a complex and frustrating hunt for years. There was a December 2005 letter intercepted that indicated bin Laden and the core al-Qaeda leadership were likely in the Waziristan region of Pakistan.
Waziristan, the tribal areas.
Exactly. Though the letter also noted they were, quote, weak and have many of their own problems, so not exactly thriving. Reflecting the difficulty, the CIA's dedicated bin Laden unit was even shut down in late 2005.
They shut down the bin Laden unit.
Briefly, yes. Reconstituted later, but it shows the lack of actionable intelligence. By 2009, some reports placed him maybe in Pakistan's Chitral district, or perhaps back in Afghanistan. But U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates admitted in December 2009 the U.S. had basically no reliable information on his whereabouts for years.
Just gone dark.
Pretty much.
What's truly revealing here, though, is how pragmatic bin Laden apparently became in his later years. His views on tactics, while in hiding, actually evolved significantly according to these sources.
This is a fascinating insight into his later leadership, yeah. In a 2010 letter that was recovered, bin Laden actually chastised some of his followers.
Oh, really? For what?
For reinterpreting a doctrine called al-Tataris. It relates to justifiable collateral damage in warfare to justify routine massacres of Muslim civilians.
He was worried about killing Muslims.
He recognized it was backfiring, turning fellow Muslims against the extremist movement. He explicitly condemned the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, for civilian casualties and actually called for a jihadist code of conduct to avoid them.
A code of conduct. From bin Laden.
Seems so. He also urged allies in Yemen to seek a truce for stability, advised al-Shabaab in Somalia to focus on economic development, and told followers worldwide to focus more on education and persuasion rather than direct confrontations with other Islamic political parties.
That's quite a shift. Shows a strategic mind still working, adapting to the pressures.
Definitely. Adapting to the negative consequences of indiscriminate violence.
And then, a decade after 9/11, after years of silence and uncertainty, the search finally narrowed significantly.
Yes. The breakthrough came. In April 2011, U.S. intelligence, through painstaking work tracking a courier, traced him to a specific location, a large 3-story mansion in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
Abbottabad, not the tribal areas.
No, a city. A
Yeah.
military garrison city, actually. About 160 kilometers from the Afghan border, but crucially, just 1.3 kilometers less than a mile southwest of the Pakistan Military Academy.
Oh, cool. Right next to their West Point equivalent. Incredible.
Incredible location. And Google Earth imagery indicated the compound itself was built sometime between 2001 and 2005, meaning he had likely been living there right under their noses for a significant period.
5, 6 years maybe. So after 10 long years, this discovery led to the decisive end of the manhunt. What were the details of that final operation?
Operation Neptune Spear. Osama bin Laden was killed by U.S. Navy SEAL operatives in Abbottabad, Pakistan on May 2, 2011, shortly after 1:00 a.m. local time.
SEAL Team 6.
Yes, the operation was ordered by President Barack Obama, involved a team from DVGRU, also known as SEAL Team 6, with crucial CIA ground support. The team launched from Afghanistan, flew in stealth helicopters, and swiftly concluded the extensive search in that raid.
A dramatic end. And what happened to his body and to the compound itself after the raid?
Well, reports at the time stated his body was taken back to Afghanistan for positive identification using DNA. Then it was buried at sea within 24 hours, supposedly in accordance with Islamic law regarding prompt burial.
Buried at sea.
Yes. Though it's worth noting, subsequent reporting has questioned some details, like whether an imam was actually present for Islamic rites during the sea burial.
Some lingering questions there.
A few. And legally, U.S. federal prosecutors officially dropped all criminal charges against him on June 15, 2011.
Okay. And the compound?
The compound itself in Abbottabad was demolished in February 2012 by Pakistani authorities. The main reason given was to prevent it from becoming some kind of shrine or tourist attraction.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And there were plans announced in 2013 to build an amusement park on the site, though I'm not sure if that ever happened, trying to erase its infamous past.
Okay. Now, one of the most controversial aspects surrounding his death was the allegations of Pakistani support, or at least knowledge, of his whereabouts. What do the sources say about these claims?
This is a huge point of contention, and the sources reflect that complexity. The fact is, bin Laden was killed in this large, fortified complex, reportedly his home for at least 5 years.
Right.
Less than 2 kilometers from Pakistan's premier military academy. That location alone raises massive questions.
It certainly does.
Now, officially, both the U.S. and Pakistani governments claimed no Pakistani officials knew of his presence there.
That was the official line.
That was, and largely remains, the official line. However, prominent journalists like Carlotta Gall and Seymour Hersh, known for their deep dive investigations.
Right, Hersh especially.
Yes. They alleged that senior Pakistani intelligence officials, potentially including the ISI Director General at the time, Ahmad Shuja Pasha, knew of bin Laden's presence, and perhaps even knew about the U.S. mission in advance, or at least tacitly allowed it.
Hersh claimed a walk-in source gave him up for the reward money.
Right. Hersh's reporting claimed the CIA learned his whereabouts from a former senior Pakistani intelligence official who essentially defected or sold the information for a large chunk of that $25 million reward.
Okay.
But again, both the U.S. and Pakistani governments have consistently and strongly denied these alternative stories.
So what was Pakistan's official stance amidst these very serious allegations? How do they explain it?
Well, Pakistani ambassador to the U.S. at the time, Hussein Haqqani, promised a full inquiry into how their intelligence services failed so spectacularly to find him. He publicly questioned if the support system that enabled bin Laden was within the government and the state of Pakistan or within the society of Pakistan, a crucial distinction.
Pointing maybe to non-state actors or sympathizers?
Possibly. President Asif Ali Zardari flatly denied that his country's forces sheltered bin Laden. He argued their limited resources were focused on fighting the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP, who were actively attacking the Pakistani state.
Right.
And it's worth adding, Steve Call, another respected journalist who wrote extensively on this. His 2019 assessment stated there's still no direct smoking gun evidence showing official Pakistani knowledge. And he suggests bin Laden himself was actually quite wary of contact with Pakistani intelligence and police, suggesting he was actively trying to avoid detection by them, too.
So, still murky. A lot of unanswered questions about complicity versus incompetence.
Very murky. It remains one of the biggest lingering questions.
Okay. Finally, let's talk about his enduring legacy. How is he perceived around the world, and how has that perception maybe shifted over time?
It's a really mixed and evolving picture. In the early 2000s, particularly after the Iraq War started,
Right.
Despite condemnations from U.S. allied Arab governments, you definitely saw anti-American protesters in places like Pakistan, the Palestinian territories, using his portraits. He gained a kind of cult status, almost a folk hero image among some, particularly the poor and disaffected who felt aggrieved by U.S. foreign policy.
So he had a period of significant popularity in some regions.
He did. Some opinion polls back then showed surprisingly high favorable ratings, maybe 50–60% in certain Muslim countries during the peak of the Iraq War.
But that perception clearly didn't last, did it?
No, it definitely underwent a significant shift over the following years. By the time of his death in 2011, Arab reaction was largely described as muted. It was heavily overshadowed by the Arab Spring movements, which were focused on internal change, democracy, dignity, not al-Qaeda's vision.
Right, the narrative had changed.
Completely. And a Pew Research Center study in 2011 found that support for bin Laden and al-Qaeda had steadily declined across the Muslim world for years, dropping to as low as 1% in Lebanon, for example. The study basically described him as discredited among most Muslims by then.
Discredited, that's a strong word.
It is. In India, his death was generally celebrated, but it also raised serious concerns about his long-term presence next door in Pakistan. And then, much more recently, in 2020, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan controversially referred to him in Parliament as a shaheed, or martyr, which stirred up considerable debate both domestically and internationally.
Yeah, that caused a stir. And in the Western world, of course, the perception remains starkly different.
Oh, absolutely. Starkly and overwhelmingly negative. He is almost universally reviled as a terrorist mastermind and mass murderer.
Understandably.
The New York Times obituary, for example, powerfully called him the North Star of global terrorism, equated his impact in terms of evil to figures like Hitler or Stalin.
Wow. Heavy comparisons.
Extremely. Mark Hosenball, a veteran intelligence reporter, described bin Laden's terrifying power as making men willingly go to their deaths for the sole purpose of indiscriminately killing Americans, men, women, and children. He noted him as this unusual combination, at once mystical and fanatical and deliberate and efficient.
Mystical and fanatical, but also deliberate and efficient. That captures the contradiction, doesn't it?
It really does. It's a testament to the profound, devastating, and horrific impact he had on the world.
So, from a privileged childhood with those surprising, diverse interests to becoming the architect of global terror, Osama bin Laden's life journey is just this incredibly complex tapestry of ideology, ambition, and unimaginable devastation. We've traced his evolution from a mujahideen hero in some eyes to the most wanted man in the world, guided by the very sources you provided.
And his story really underscores the profound and often deeply contradictory impact a single individual's worldview can have on global events, how ideology can twist and shape actions.
Yeah.
It reminds us, I think, of the critical importance of understanding historical context, digging into the sources, and trying to grasp the deep-seated, though often warped, motivations behind such world-altering actions.
Absolutely. So as you, our listeners, reflect on today's deep dive, what stands out to you? How does understanding his background, his stated motivations as presented in these sources, how does that change or maybe deepen your perception of the events he instigated?
Yeah, what's the key takeaway for you?
We hope this deep dive has provided you with a comprehensive, maybe more nuanced understanding of this pivotal and deeply complex figure in our recent history.